Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode. Today, we're talking about the 4 steps to double your consulting revenue. And even if you don't have a goal to double your revenue, that might sound like a huge leap to you. I'll show you today how it is not the biggest leap that it might seem to be. Even if your goal isn't necessarily to double your revenue, what you're going to learn today, these 4 powerful steps, can be applied to any revenue goal you have. So I'm really excited to share this content with you and help you start thinking about your business in a more strategic way. So with that, I'll just kind of give you the background for a moment here. I had done a webinar for MBO Partners. If you don't know who they are, McLean, their VP of marketing, was on the podcast a few weeks ago, but they are a marketplace and they do a lot for independent consultants, helping matching them to clients like PwC and Deloitte and Amazon and others. And anyway, they do so much research in the marketplace and provide a lot of resources to independent consultants. And so they asked me to come to do a webinar for them I've done several of them in the last few months, but the last one was about how to double your consulting revenue. And I can tell you, it is by far the most popular webinar that I've ever done for them and in general. And I just really wanted to share the information with you today. If you happen to have already watched that webinar, keep listening because you're going to hear it a little bit differently today. And if you haven't yet listened to that webinar, you may want to augment what we're talking about today by going to listen to it. So we can put the link to the show notes to the replay, which will be great. So with that, that is our focus for today, how to double your consulting revenue and the 4 steps to do that. And again, really think through each of these 4 steps that I'm going to give you and how they apply to your business, regardless of what your goal is. You may not have any increase in revenue as your goal this year. You may want a flat revenue, the same revenue that you made last year. That's not a problem. What I want to use today's episode to understand how to make that money with more fulfillment, with more impact, with more strategic projects, and with more free time for yourself. You may have a goal to increase your consulting revenue. And so you'll want to think about what I'm sharing with you from that lens. Regardless of what your goal is, I know for a fact that these 4 steps can really help you to fine tune your strategy so that ultimately you're making more money, having more impact with the work that you're doing, and freeing up your time so that you've got time to work on your business, not just in your business, and also have time for other things that you love doing. So with that, before we dive in, I want to remind you about the Independent Consultants Scalability Scorecard. You can find it at the URL icscorecard.com. So the 2 letters IC for independent consultant, scorecard.com. And this is a great complement to today's episode because it really dives in and helps diagnose for you around these 4 areas of your business so that you can grow your business with more ease. You can make more money and ultimately work less and have more impact. So go take that scalability scorecard if you haven't already done so. It will help you to prioritize what you want to focus on to move the needle in your business. Okay, so with that, let's talk through the agenda for today. The agenda is I'm going to walk you through these 4 steps. So let me tell you what they are, and then we'll pull it all together at the end. So be sure to listen to the end because I'm going to give you some very actionable questions to be asking for you in your business to put all 4 of these components in place. So, the first thing we're going to do is talk about those four steps, and they are not sequential. So, you can be doing these in any order, and likely you'll be doing number four kind of concurrently throughout. So, don't think about this as a linear thing. We're just going to walk through these four areas and think about you and your business and which you think will make the biggest impact and start there. So the four areas are inventory. I'm going to walk you through the concept of consulting inventory and what that means for you and how it can be an enabler for you to make more money and free up a lot of the time that you're using for delivery right now. The second component of doubling your consulting revenue is pricing ultimately, which relies on the concept of value. So we'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about demand, creating demand for your business. And then fourth and finally, I'm going to give it a little cliffhanger. The most critical piece is number four, the fourth one that I'll go over. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's a little cliffhanger. So stay tuned to the end to hear what that one is, because you definitely don't want to miss what it is. Okay, so that is our agenda for today. Let's start off with inventory. So, inventory, most of us would think, well, we need to work more in order to double our consulting revenue. And that's why I want to start here. You don't need to work more in order to double your consulting revenue. Essentially, you need to make sure that your inventory, your consulting inventory, is an effective use of your time as possible. So let's talk about more about what that means. Your inventory for your business is the services you sell your clients and the boundaries around when and how you're going to deliver them. So, as an example, right now, you might be more of an hourly type of a consultant who's working more as a staff augmentation type of a resource, an extra pair of hands. If that's the example and the type of work you're doing, the services you're selling in a lot of ways right now are your time. So, of course, in order to make more money, you're going to have to spend more time working. When you start thinking about your consulting business in a different way and centering it around the outcomes that you're selling to your clients, then you start freeing yourself up to create boundaries around how you're going to deliver those services and ultimately set yourself up in a position where you can work less and make more money. So, let me give you a few examples of what that would look like. You want to be thinking about your inventory in a very strategic way. And your inventory is the time that you're spending delivering for clients, the services you sell to those clients, and ultimately, like I was saying earlier, the boundaries around when and how you're going to deliver them. So, the examples. Let's say that you wanted to go from making 100K to 200K this year. Let's start there. If you think about your inventory, and right now, let's say you might even be charging hourly. You want to get out of that, but right now you're charging hourly and you want to double your revenue and your income this year. Two very simple ways to do that would be to double your bill rate, right? You could double your bill rate from $100 to $200 per hour as an example, and that would add 100K if you were working 90 hours a month. A couple of other examples of you shifting your inventory would be that you sell 5 20K strategy or planning projects. That adds 100K to the bottom line. Or you could add 2 5K per month retainer clients. That adds 120K to the bottom line. So there are some examples of looking at your inventory and what you're offering and how long it takes you to deliver that client work and strategically updating your inventory so that it fits with your goals, both from a revenue perspective and from a how much time you're working perspective. So let me give you another example. Let's say that you want to double from 250K to 500K. One way to do that would be for you to do a combination of things. You might increase some of your current pricing, add another 50 or 75K from that. Here's an example: 7 15K assessments would add around 105K to your bottom line. And then selling a retainer client at 10K per month, which adds another 120K to your bottom line. So that gets you really close to the 250K that you need to double your revenue from 250 to 500. We'll put some examples of these visually in the show notes. I always love seeing things in writing. So we'll put these in the show notes. You can very clearly see ways to get from 100 to 200 and 250 to 500 and even 500 to 1 million. And it's not that big of a leap when you look at it in this way. So hopefully those examples give you some ideas about thinking about your inventory and what you're offering and what it takes to deliver what you're offering, and freeing up some of your time to deliver these types of projects so that you can make more use of the time that you have. So that's the first concept, is you want to think about how to double your inventory. Ask yourself, what types of work do you want to offer, and how can you fit in what you charge for them in a way that fits the goals that you've got in terms of how much you want to work daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. So essentially what you're doing is reverse engineering your inventory to hit that number that you want. And you can go back and reference also episode 67, where I talk about the bottom up business plan. And this gives you another way to look at this inventory concept to say, okay, here's how I back into my revenue goals. Here's how I back, including how much time I want to be spending delivering these services. And it will help you to figure out how you can build out a lead gen plan in order to make that happen. Okay, so that's the first component here of doubling your revenue without working more. And the second component of that formula is to rethink your value. This is about pricing, right? So, first, we know what we want to be doing from an inventory perspective. And the second is thinking about pricing. How do you increase your pricing? How do you shift the type of pricing that you're offering from potentially hourly in a way that encourages you and requires you to work more to make more? And start thinking about, how do you double the value you provide? Because money comes from value. We always think about, I think by default, especially as former employees, that money comes from time. The more time that we spend, the more money that we make, the more bonuses that we get. Really, money comes from the value you provide. Think about an iPhone. The components of the iPhone, I'm sure the chips aren't cheap, but really the components of the iPhone are not worth $1,000 or $1,500, how much ever an iPhone costs right now. But we pay that money because we want the experience. We want the results that we get from having this phone, all of the features and all of the use cases that we can execute, right? And so thinking about it and applying that to your business, start thinking about, where does the money come from in my business? Why are clients paying me? They're paying you because of the value that you provide. And so as you start thinking about how do you double your revenue without working more, you've got to start thinking about, how do you double the value that you provide? I like to think about it in three kind of buckets: positioning, offers, and sales. So when you think about your positioning, let's start there. Think about, how are you coming across to your buyers and your decision makers and collaborators and referrers? Are you coming across as more passive or tactical? You want to start thinking about, how do you double that positioning? How do you move into coming across as more strategic and proactive and advisory and leaderly and expertly? You've got to double the value you're providing by first doubling the positioning that you've got, then doubling your offers. How can you offer something that's worth 2 times what you've been offering? Are you offering something that's centered around more of the value of how someone would calculate the value of a full-time employee, versus thinking about what you do and the outcomes you help to drive, and thinking about how that's perceived by your buyers and your stakeholders, and calculating your pricing based off of that. And thirdly, think about why the client needs your help. So often, we get into this trap of the end result or deliverable that we provide to our clients. Like, for example, we might be providing them with an HR, strategy for the year for retention, or we might be providing them an upgrade strategy and roadmap for a certain software that we're an expert in, or we might be providing them with an overall marketing strategy for the year relative to some goal that they've got. Whatever it is that you do for your clients, think about that. So often we get trapped into the idea of the deliverable and don't think about why they care about that. And when you're able to shift your sales process and center it around understanding and calculating the benefits to the buyer and or buyers, both organizationally and personally, then you're able to articulate the value you provide. And it's not centered around the deliverables, it's centered around the outcomes and the impact. So, what does it matter that you're providing this work and this expertise and these deliverables that you're providing? So, take a step back and think about for yourself, how am I going to double the value I provide? And a lot of times that doesn't mean doing anything differently. It means that you're just thinking about it differently. You're positioning it differently. You're articulating it differently. And you're having a slightly different discussion with your potential clients about what it is that you do and the outcomes you help them to achieve. So, those are the first two components: doubling your inventory, which means really thinking strategically about how you're using those hours that you've set aside on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to deliver your services, and thinking about how can I up level those so that they're worth more to my end clients and to you, worth more in the sense of you're making more money off of the same amount of time or less that you're spending. Then, secondly, you're really thinking about your value and how that relates to your pricing so that you can double the value you're articulating to your clients and therefore charge more for it. The third component to this concept of doubling your consulting revenue is doubling the demand for your work. I love to share this concept of a demand arc. So the demand arc starts kind of on the bottom left-hand side. If you imagine just a big arrow, you're dependent on other people for your work. You might be dependent on referrals. You might be dependent on marketplaces. You might be dependent on recruiters or agencies. And you're taking what you can get and not wanting to leave money on the table. So you're basically just taking whatever comes across your desk. I hear from so many of you who feel like you're in a position where you often panic and take work that you know you don't want to do, but you're worried nothing else is coming down the pipeline. And so you take what you can get. That's what I call the dependent mode of an independent consulting business. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the dependent mode of an independent consulting business, but likely you want more autonomy and you want more control over the types of clients, the type of work, and the way that the work is done. You want more control over that. So moving out of that requires you to double the demand for your work. In order to double the demand for your work, you want to be thinking about, how can I become known for what I do? How can I move out of pounding the pavement and start creating inbound opportunities for myself? A lot of time that comes from things like having a clearer specialization or clearer messaging on the problems that you solve. It comes through things like networking and speaking and writing and authoring and creating a reputation for what you do. So think about where you are in the evolution of your business. You might be dependent right now, for example, on recruiters or marketplaces. You're not going to jump all the way over to becoming someone who's sought after potentially right away. You want to start building a foundation to become that sought after person. But start with the next step, which would be, how do I create more demand for myself? How do I double the demand for the work that I have? And simplistically, the answer to that is consistency with your lead generation processes, not letting them drop off when you feel too busy, not letting them drop off when you think, well, I've got a client right now in line of sight for the next 6 months. I don't need to worry about lead generation. That's not running a business. That's just you basically going through multiple job searches every year and finding new kind of mini jobs for yourself. That's not what you want to be doing to run a business where you're increasing your revenue and being able to work less doing it. So think about for yourself, where are you at in your business right now? And where do you want to get to? What do you need to be doing? How do you need to be shifting to become more consistent, more clear, more visible? And think about that from the perspective of ultimately creating double demand for what it is that you do. We'll put a link in the show notes to my lead generation routine so you can just apply this to create consistency. Most of the time, to double the demand for your work, all comes down to consistency of talking to more people and getting more visibility. Ultimately, it can look like creating speaking pipelines and writing pipelines. So think about it for you in your business. And if you're having trouble figuring out, where you are on the trajectory and what the next steps for you, reach out. I can help you with that. But today I've given you some ideas. So really think about where you're at right now to create demand. And in order to double the demand, what are some of the things you need to put in place to make that happen? Okay, so that's the third component. You want to be doubling your demand. So we've doubled our inventory by making it more strategic. We've doubled the pricing by doubling the value that we provide and the way that we articulate it and think about it. We've talked about doubling your demand. And so now to the cliffhanger that I shared at the beginning, what is the fourth component of doubling your revenue without working more? And that is resetting or doubling the way you view yourself. This is so important and is always overlooked. How are you being? How are you thinking about yourself as a business owner? How are you thinking about yourself as a consultant? A lot of times we think about ourselves as well, I'm a contractor, or I'm an extra pair of hands, or I'm just a fill in the blank, or I'm bad at, or I hate business development. We've done other episodes on these things. When you want to start doubling your revenue, when you want to start making more money and working less, you've got to start shifting the way you think about yourself and your self identity. Moving from I'm a contractor or I'm just a fill in the blank. You can start off by thinking about yourself as a consultant, as an advisor, as someone who's good at business development. Maybe not great, but at least good at business development versus bad at or hating business development. And then ultimately moving yourself and your self identity to the really truly thinking of yourself as a business owner, truly thinking of yourself as an expert, as a peer to your clients, not as a subordinate, as a thought leader, as someone who's great at business development, as someone who belongs in the rooms that you're in. This is so important. You heard Brian talking about this on episode 100. You've heard me talking about it throughout a lot of these episodes. This is so important. And oftentimes can be the difference. You could do all those other 3 steps. And if you miss this, it can be the difference maker. So really intentionally start replacing your self-identity and becoming that expert, that business owner, that thought leader ahead of time before you feel like you're even ready to give yourself permission to call yourself that. I can assure you, most people are waiting for some arbitrary time to think they're successful or to think of themselves as a true business owner, and therefore creating a plateau, creating a false limit. And I don't want that for you. So let's pull all of this together, these 4 components of doubling your consulting revenue. Start thinking about the answers to, I would just sit down and brainstorm. And I'm going to challenge you to brainstorm at least 10 answers to each of these 4 questions. And we'll put these 4 questions in the show notes also. Brainstorm at least 10 answers, because usually the first few answers are kind of simple and they roll off of our brain and we write them down. When we start pressing ourselves to get up to 10 and over, there are studies that show this type of exercise is where you start getting really creative and meaningful answers. So that's why I am challenging you to give yourself at least 10 answers to each of these 4 questions. And here are the 4 questions. And again, we'll put these in the show notes for you, along with a few diagrams so you can see visually some of the things I've been sharing with you today. Okay, number 1, how can I double the value of my inventory? So thinking about your inventory, your willingness and boundaries around how much you want to work and the type of work you want to be doing, and making sure that that fits into your overall business and personal plan. Secondly, how can I double the value of what I offer? This comes down to your positioning and the actual offers that you're making to your ideal clients and your sales process. How can I double the value of what I offer, which ultimately doubles the pricing that you're offering? The third question, how can I double my client demand? And the fourth question, how can I double who I am being? These are the 4 questions. When you sit down as a business owner and you start answering these questions, you're going to be thinking about your business more strategically. You're going to be starting to solve problems that you've been encountering that have been creating plateaus for yourself. This will help lead for you to a roadmap, a more strategic roadmap for your business this year. Now, with that being said, it's very easy to get stuck into your old ways. It's easy to justify what's happening for all the reasons. And this is where a coach comes in, can help you to see where you are limiting yourself and sabotaging yourself and keeping yourself from moving to that next level in your business because you don't see what's possible, but I can see what's possible for you. I would love to talk with you more about whether or not coaching is a good fit for where you're at in your business and what you want to be accomplishing. So with that, I encourage you to reach out, book a consultation with me where we'll talk about your specific business, your goals, and where you're getting stuck. And we can help you to achieve those goals so that you don't have to have another year where you're repeating the same results you've been repeating over and over again, or where you're working more than you want to be working, or where you're working on things you don't want to be working on anymore and would love to have more variety and impact and work with ideal clients instead of with any type of client, and ultimately making more money doing all of this. So reach out and book a consultation at consultmelissa.com, and I will see you again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.